Hi, folks. Thanks for stopping by our session. I'm really excited about this session that's going to be talking about addressing new challenges with light at night data. The order of our speakers is slightly changed. So we'll have our last speaker go first, but otherwise the order remains the same. To our speakers, and just a reminder, targeting 10 minutes. That'll leave ample time for a panel discussion afterwards. In which case, then you'll just come up here, and then we'll facilitate going back and forth between the online and the in-person Q&A. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Qian, who is, many of you may know, is our HAQAST member and entire team lead, doing double duty at University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston.
All right, thank you. So how do I see my slides? I'll pull up for you. Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. So our whole panel is about light at night, and the objective of my talk is to give you a brief introduction about light at night, and also trying to convince you that this is something important to study because it has important public health and environmental justice implications. So we all know that since the invention of electric lighting, the nightscape of our world has been drastically changed. And on the right side of the screen, you see this satellite map of light at night, which was taken in 2013 and covers the whole continental United States. And you can see all those bright spots indicating where the levels of light at night are high, and you see all the major cities and also some small dots that line the highways. So light at night has really become a ubiquitous environmental exposure. It has been estimated that according to at least one study, that in many urban areas, the level of light at night has been increasing by 5 to 20% annually throughout the second half of last century. And nowadays, more than 99% of the US population live in light polluted areas. And there is no denying that there is tremendous benefit associated with light at night. However, that benefit is also accompanied by serious ecological, economical, and public health consequences. So I'll talk about the health consequences of light at night. That's the focus of my research. And the reason that we believe light at night is not good for our health is because we all have this internal circadian timing system. So our body has this, not just one, it's a series of circadian clocks that are internal, that are evolved as a fundamental adaptation to the 24-hour light and dark cycle on our planet. And this circadian clock regulates many physiological and behavioral processes in humans and also in other species as well. And a challenge, at least to our humans in the modern world, is that we really get too little daylight and too much light at night, right? So when those two problems combined, this really weakens or disrupts or impairs our circadian function, which may lead to downstream health consequences. So specifically talking this too much light at night, it can do two things that are detrimental to our health. One, you probably have heard about this, that light is at night, not light throughout the day, but light at night specifically suppresses melatonin, which is an important circadian hormone that regulates many important processes. And also because we have light at night, that enables us to do things that we're really not supposed to be doing at night, such as not sleeping, just looking at your cell phones, binge watching Netflix, all those things, and snacking, all those things that we're not supposed to do. We're not really evolved to do. And all of those can lead to sleep deficiency, circadian disruption, and health problems. So there has been a growing body of literature that have linked the light at night with a wide range of adverse health outcomes. So one of them is sleep deficiency, which is kind of an obvious target there. So showing on this figure on the right is a paper that we published 2 years ago. You see the light and night levels on x-axis and the likelihood of having short sleep or sleep deficiency on the y-axis. Men and women are shown separately. You see those 2 lines go up. So higher levels of light at night are associated with a higher likelihood of having sleep deficiency. And this is in a large cohort in the US. So besides sleep deficiency, there are also several studies that have linked light and night with various forms of cancer, breast cancer, thyroid cancer, pancreatic cancer, and prostate cancer, mental disorders, especially in adolescents, cognitive decline in older adults, obesity, and insulin resistance. So really a wide range of problems out there. So I want to talk a little bit about the study that we have been doing, supported by NASA. So one of the first thing we really want to do is this descriptive study of the United States, trying to identify where the hotspots are. Where are the places with the highest level of light at night? And where are the places with the most rapid increase in light at night? So the first one is spatial distribution. And we're doing this at a county level. The reason that we're doing this at a county level is, those administrative levels are important. That's where, at which level the public health statistics are usually reported. Also, policy making, decisions are occurring at those levels. So this is a summary figure of average light at night because we're using the black marble product. So this is for the period between 2012 to 2019. So all the counties in the United States are showing here, over 3,000 of them. And you can see darker colors are where lights are strong, and the lighter colors are where they're darker. So on the right side, you have this little table that lists the top 10 counties with the highest light at night. And we did this in 2 ways. The first, on the left, you have average light at night. So this is just their average, absolute levels of light at night. And on the right, you have population burden. So this is light at night multiplied by population in that county. So as assessment of, really how many people are exposed. So you have all the usual suspects there. I think 4 out of the 5 counties in New York City are there. You have District of Columbia. When you look at the population burden, you start to get some of the more populated counties. So the second one, Harris, Texas, is where we are right now. And you have Cook County, in Chicago, Los Angeles, and all the other, New York City.
Is that in order?
I'm sorry?
Is that in order?
That's in order, yes.
District of Columbia.
Yeah, it's from top 1 to 10. Yes. So this is the spatial distribution. And the next thing, as I mentioned, is temporal trend. So now we're switching to where are the hotspots that have experienced the most rapid increase or the largest increase in light at night during that period, 2012 to 2019. So here, again, you see this map. So the blue areas are actually places experienced a decrease in light at night. So that covers a large part of our country, especially in the middle portion. But you also have a few counties that are red or the warmer colors. That's where the increase occurred. And I think the most striking result came out of this is, so again, so on the right side, the table lists the top 10 counties. And I did this 2 ways, again, right, by average light at night and by population burden. When you look at the average light at night, every single one of the top 10 are in this state of Texas. So I did a little bit of investigative work because it was really, I thought this is really striking. And I wanted to see where those counties are, and turned out many of these counties are small rural counties. So they are not the usual suspects. And then I dug a little deeper. And one thing I discovered is that almost all of those counties has experienced a boom in their oil and gas industry during that period. So which really suggests, because there's a website where I can Google them or search them, and I can see there is a large increase in the number of permits they acquired in those counties for drilling. So I guess this really tells you that some specific economic activities can have a large impact to drive changes in light and night. And of course, when you look at the population burden, because it's heavily weighted by population, so we start to see larger cities with Los Angeles on the top, Harris County here again, and some of the other areas. So another thing we did is we tried to see the correlation between changes in light and night and GDP growth and population growth, because those are sort of what you would expect to be correlated with light and night. We found both of them are highly correlated with light and night change, but they don't explain the picture fully. So there are other factors in play. So now for the last part of my talk, I just want to briefly touch upon this idea that light and night is also an environmental justice issue. So this is, I believe, the first paper came out that looked at light and night as an environmental justice issue. That's in 2020. And the conclusion from this paper was that the minority population in this country really shoulders a disproportionately high burden of light and night. And we sort of set to replicate and also expand this line of investigation. So what we did is, so the previous paper, they only looked at a few factors, such as racial ethnic composition. I don't remember if they also did age, location, but it's single variables. So what we did in our analysis, we took advantage of CDC's social vulnerability index, which is sort of a composite measure of many different dimensions of social vulnerability. So you get an overall measure. You also have 4 different components that covers socioeconomic status, household and household composition and disability, minority status or composition, and housing and transportation. So on the right side, this is for the overall social vulnerability index. And you have light and night on the y-axis. You see this line that goes up, which suggests that higher levels of social vulnerability are associated with higher levels of light. And by the way, I forgot to mention this analysis was performed at a census tract level. So it's smaller than the county level that I just showed you. And then we sort of dissected this a little bit more by looking at the individual components. So if I just blow off the final data point there, so that's comparing the highest quintile with the lowest, and also show you the association for each of the 4 components. What you really see here is that we saw this positive association between higher vulnerability and higher light only for SES, for minority composition, and for housing and transportation, but not for household composition, which is really interesting. And moreover, we also did stratify analysis. The figure is too complicated for me to show here, but we stratified by rural urban status. And what we really show is that association between social vulnerability and light and night varied considerably across the whole rural urban continuum. So not in all the places they have a uniform association, which really suggests that the relationship is rather complex. And in order to understand this as an environmental justice issue, you need to dig a little further. So this is my final slide. I always want to emphasize that when we think about an environmental justice issue, it's not just about the uneven distribution of the exposure. It's also about the uneven response to the same exposure. So what we show here in this study is the relationship between light and night and breast cancer risk. But we did one thing, is that we divided the women in our cohort into 2 groups. Those women who live in high poverty areas, so disadvantaged neighborhoods, disadvantaged communities, and those who lived in low poverty areas. What we found here is that if you focus on, so those are 2 lines, for the solid line, which is the low poverty neighborhoods, there's really no association between light and night and breast cancer risk. It's only when you move to the high poverty neighborhoods, you saw this relationship where high levels of light at night were associated with higher risk of breast cancer. What this suggests is that this link between light and breast cancer is stronger for those women who lived in disadvantaged neighborhoods. We speculated why that might be the case. It could be that they have poor housing conditions, sleep conditions. They may have challenging work schedule. They may work night shifts, or they may have high levels of stress, and all of which can exacerbate the negative health effects of light at night. So I just really want to bring this to emphasize that it's both distribution and response that may vary across the population. So just in conclusion, I believe light at night is an environmental justice issue. And as researchers, I really hope to identify the vulnerable communities that are negatively impacted by this light at night. And also hopefully our research can lead to the development, implementation, and evaluation of potential interventions to address this problem. So that's all from me. I just thank my founder and collaborators.
Wonderful. That's an excellent way to start off the session. Just as a reminder, we'll be holding our questions till the end for the panel then. And then when, just so I don't forget, for the speakers, when you do get to the panel, if you could restate the question for our online or remote audience, that'd be wonderful. I'll try to remind us if not. Our next speaker is John Barentine with Dark Sky Consulting, talking about dark skies and conservation, and how and why we protect the night.
Yeah, John, I'm about to turn the speakers on. Do you want to share your own slides?
That's fine. I can do that.
Great.
All right.
I'm going to stop sharing. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
And then you want to turn it on?
Ready? Okay. All right. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Are we good? How about now? Can you hear me? Should be able to. Yep. Okay. Yes? Let's see. Okay, I'm hearing I sound fine. All right. So I'm ready to go ahead. There we go. All right, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction and to the organizers today for asking me to speak to you. In the next 10 minutes, or hopefully a little bit under, I will tell you about the value of natural nighttime darkness, the threat it faces, what we stand to lose if it is not conserved, and how we go about saving it. So every human once lived in a world where the night sky looked like this. This is what was seen everywhere. There were only a few natural sources of light at night in the environment. And because of that, our biology evolved to expect a 24-hour light and dark cycle whose rhythm was set by the rising and the setting of the sun. And Dr. Xiao gave a nice introduction to that aspect in her talk. This is something that's innate to our biology. The nights were filled with stars and they influenced our culture and our folklore. This was the world in which we grew up as a species. But now we see through a glass darkly. And I use that phrase here ironically because it used to mean a diminished image that was seen in a poor quality mirror, something that looked dark. But in this current context, it means more like a bright veil that's drawn in front of our view that obscures what is beyond. The overuse of artificial light at night in outdoor spaces has separated us from the night that our species grew up with. And it has come along so quickly that our biology has yet to adapt to this. In the 130 years since the advent of electric light, humans have utterly changed the geography of the night. Dr. Xiao showed a sort of a subset of this image of just the United States, but here's the global context. This is a composite NASA NOAA image that shows the Earth as if it were night everywhere all at once and with no clouds. It was made over the course of about a year. Our cities shine very brightly in this image, outlining the continents, which themselves are glowing very faintly in moonlight. Dr. Chris Elvidge will speak next about how we can learn about light pollution using satellite remote sensing from platforms like this one. There's no universal definition of the term light pollution, but this is one that I like a lot. So sky glow, which is the tendency of the night sky to become bright as a result of light sources on the ground, is just one symptom or a manifestation of light pollution, but it's not the only one. Glare and light trespass are some of the other symptoms that we frequently encounter. And furthermore, artificial light at night, as we tend to use the term, excludes naturally occurring sources of light in the environment like bioluminescence, wildfire, lightning, and others. And I also focus here really on the outdoor space, even though from a health perspective, indoor artificial light at night exposure is also a known risk factor. So what do we know with confidence about light pollution? Light at night continues to advance across our planet at an average rate of growth of about 2% per year, but there are individual countries that are seeing double-digit changes year on year. There are few environmental influences attributable to people that have caused such change so quickly in the history of our species. The brightening night sky is just the canary in the coal mine. The real issue is how much artificial light is now on the ground. Even though cities are responsible for a lot of that light, I want to try to convince you that it's not just confined to urban places. This is not just a problem of cities. In fact, light pollution can drift very far from cities. I'm showing you some results here from the US National Park Service, which measured the brightness of the night sky at increasing distances away from downtown Las Vegas, Nevada. At 155 miles out, there is still 1% artificial light in the night sky compared to an assumed natural background level. It's a huge distance from the city where the city's influence is still being felt. In fact, the glow from Las Vegas is visible on the horizon from Great Basin National Park, almost 200 miles away. That means that the so-called light footprint of the city of Las Vegas is at least 117,000 square miles, which is a land area almost half the size of Texas. And that light affects plant and animal species that need nighttime darkness in order to ensure their well-being. So why does this matter? So Dr. Xiao gave a little bit of background on this and argued that it was a public health concern and also one of environmental justice. And what I'm here to tell you in addition to that is that it's not just a matter of whether or not we can see the stars at night. All of the items that I'm showing you here on the screen have significant interactions with light pollution. And there are important environmental and social challenges that are involved. At the same time, we have a pretty good idea as to what the solutions to this problem are. The task is to convince enough people that not only does a problem exist, but we as a society should do something to try to solve it. So a related question is, why is this happening? How did we get to nighttime scenes like this one, looking out over downtown San Antonio? The problem is mainly in the sense of light pollution as a form of waste and what that represents. We did not set out to light our cities that way, but we've come to expect our cities to look like this at night. We can change the way we use light to reduce waste and properly balance competing interests. But in order to do that, we have to reset the relationship between humans and the use of outdoor artificial light at night that has developed over many decades. So the next question logically is, how do we do it? And I'll explain that by starting with an example of what I think is the wrong way to approach solving the problem. This is a view of the Earth at night taken by an astronaut with a camera aboard the International Space Station. The astronauts look out the windows and they can see our cities glowing very brightly when they're on the night side of the Earth. There's a lot of light down there. And it looks like maybe what is at the lower right is sort of an island that's detached from the mainland. But if I fill in some borders, it becomes pretty apparent that the mostly missing light is the entire country of North Korea. Simply turning the lights off is not a reasonable way to solve the problem of light pollution. As Dr. Xiao said, there are many good uses for artificial light at night that our society has come to expect and will continue to need. For starters, we want people to freely choose the solution to the problem, how they approach this and what they do about it. We can't impose these changes on people against their will. So instead, what do reasonable solutions look like? And what can individuals do? These 6 basic ideas that I'm showing you here for lighting meets all of our genuine needs while avoiding light that's misdirected, applied when no one is around, and it has the right colors to protect the nighttime environment. It's incredibly easy, it's cost effective, it's fair, and it's achievable. We just need to proactively choose the solution. So how can we get there? First, we can envision a world in which unnecessary light is considered a source of pollution that's subject to reasonable controls. If we would all agree that the smoke coming out of these stacks is a pollutant known to harm the environment and people, then we should further agree that wasted artificial light at night is pollution. Another analogy is a running tap. No matter how inexpensive water is, the average person just wouldn't waste it. And there's a solution in that analogy too. You turn the water on when you need it, you use only the amount you need, and then you turn it off when you're done. It's really that simple. Second, concern for how we light our cities at night should be an integral part of the urban planning process and not an afterthought. Lighting design should enter planning at the earliest stages, and it should go along with other environmental and infrastructure concerns. But often it's one of the last elements to receive attention. This means thinking carefully about how people use light and catering to real needs rather than assuming what those needs are based on the received wisdom of how we have lit our cities in the past. Third, in a more perfect world, we would have regional lighting plans that comprehensively manage light and darkness in the same way that we manage other natural resources. If and when outdoor light at night is declared to be an environmental pollutant under at least some circumstances, reasonable government regulation can and must be brought to bear on this problem. But once enacted, lighting policies tend to suffer from lack of popular support, and they're not often enforced consistently or correctly. So there's certainly room here for innovation, experiment, and improvement. And lastly, if all of this works, and we think that it does, societies everywhere will start to see real benefits from protecting the night. The example I'm showing you here is the city of Flagstaff, Arizona, which is a city of about 75,000 inhabitants that was the world's first international dark sky community. I can tell you from my own experience here that there is plenty of light at night on the ground in Flagstaff, and it's a very safe city to be in at night. But also notice in this picture taken from above the city that the Milky Way is visible overhead, which is an indicator of good night sky quality. Cities can get this right, but they have to proactively choose better outcomes. At the same time, achieving this requires a different approach to our relationship with artificial light at night. And again, people have to freely choose this change. Debbie Moran will speak in a little while about some of the reasons why this isn't happening though. And so with that, I will hand it back to the organizers and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, John. Wonderful. It's really nice how this session really fits together really well. Our next speaker is Christopher Elvidge, Colorado School of Mines. Overview of satellite observed nighttime lights.
All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk today. And I've got too many slides, so I'll tap through them rather quickly. We do work with VIIRS at night. And here's a VIIRS image at night. And it was specifically designed to enable the detection of moonlit clouds. And here's an example. You can see clouds out in the water, but you also see lights at the Earth's surface. And we take a whole year's worth of data, distill it down, filter out the noise as best we can just to have the lights. Now, if you look at the spectra of lights, you'll see that there are some types of lights that are high in blue and some types that are not high in blue. The biggest culprit are the LED lights that have their excitation wavelength is in the blue. And then they use phosphorescent coatings to get the other part of the spectrum. But that's not present in incandescent metal halides or high pressure sodium. And so one of the concerns these days is that as white LEDs take over, there's more and more blue pollution. And that's important because the blue propagates through the atmosphere better, it scatters and has more biological effects. Unfortunately, neither VIIRS or its predecessor had sensitivity in the blue. They intentionally cut it out because including that makes the imagery hazier. And so they wanted to see through the haze. And so these spectral bands don't have the blue at all. Now, I was going to show you a movie. We recently did a study with high-speed cameras, and we found that there are some types of lights that flicker, alternating current flicker. And the ones that flicker the most are the high-intensity discharge lamps, like high-pressure sodium and metal halide, and they're bursting on and off 120 times a second. And there's the link to that movie. Apparently, I'm not going to be able to show it to you on the screen here today, but we've done studies of a lot of different lights, and so we've characterized their flicker. And interestingly, the LED has very low flicker, and the scales are different here. If you put this spectrum on top of the one at the top, it looks just flat. And so you do have some flicker in LED, but it's not very much. And that's the modern LEDs, not the old ones. Now, and we also studied the how long does it take for the VIIRS to collect a pixel? And it's 2 to 3 milliseconds. And the flicker is at about 8 milliseconds. So the VIIRS is actually sensitive to flicker. And we proved that looking in Tucson, where the city replaced the high pressure sodium streetlights, which are high in flicker, with LED streetlights. And you see that the signal went down. Well, they intentionally turned down the voltage after midnight, but there's less variance. And so there's more variance in here than after the LED streetlights were installed. Okay, so if we want to look for flicker, how can you look for it? Okay, so what I did was make a scattergraph for Houston of the mean versus the variance for 2020. And the best places to look for flicker are way out here, very high in variance. Turns out those are also high in the brightness of the lights as well.
You can also use the mouse.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right, I'll catch on. All right, and so we made a grid covering covering Houston, and I went fishing in there to find a place that had a lot of flicker, and I found one is Hurricane Harbor /town. I don't live in town, but it must be pretty well lit at night. Here's the temporal profile, and so this is from the start of the VIIRS to relatively recently. And you can see that there's a lot of up and down brightness in the lights. Something happened right here where where more lights were added. I don't know what that was. Maybe they expanded the parking lot or changed something. But also you'll see that the brightness of the lights goes almost all the way down to the noise floor, quite often. And so this is a case where probably the site has a single power supply, and all the lamps are getting fed from the same power supply, and they're using lights that have a lot of flicker. All right, well, let me go on to another thing. We study flares with VIIRS using the near-infrared, shortwave infrared data at night, along with the longer wavelength data, and we fit the Planck curves. And then we can calculate the temperature, source size, and radiant heat. And the reason this is related to light pollution is that flares are actually the brightest objects seen by VIIRS. And the flares in the United States are pretty small, so they're not brighter than places like Las Vegas. But there are other places in the world where there are monster flares that literally light up the sky, worse than Las Vegas. They're brighter than Las Vegas. And when I looked at the maps that she presented in the first talk, the areas that had the greatest change in the brightness of lights, there are big blocks that were set on these locations that have large numbers of gas flares. And it's probably also a human health concern regarding what's emitted by those gas flares. And here's an example, not far from here. This is on the Gulf Coast. It's the Formosa Plastic Corporation at Point Comfort, Texas. And what we do for all the flares, every year we find about 10,000 flares, and we build temporal profiles so that we can see what's happening in the flare, and we estimate the flared gas volume. All right, well, let me wrap up. Bright white LED streetlights are a major source of blue light, a chief culprit in light pollution due to scatter and biological effects. The VIIRS day-night band pass excludes the blue region. High-speed camera data can reveal flicker patterns in lights. We used a camera with that collected 1,000 frames per second. They cost about $1,000. Flicker is greatest in high-pressure sodium and metal halide bulbs, but is barely detectable in LED streetlights. AC flicker in the US is at 120 hertz. That's above the 60 hertz detection limit threshold for the conscious human eye. But studies indicate that the same effects from visible flicker also are associated with this high-speed flicker, and that effects such as eye strain and irritability have been reported for flicker rates up to 500 hertz. Flicker, we've shown that it's the VIIRS day-night band collection time is short enough that it picks up on flicker. And so this causes one of the, it's a source of variability in the VIIRS signal over time. And finally, VIIRS night fire temporal profiles reveal activity patterns at industrial pollution sites, such as gas flares, refineries, and petrochemical factories. Okay, well, that's it. And I hope that the presentation is available for anybody that wants to download it. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Wonderful. And then rounding out our session is a nice perspective on the needs for policy and its relevance there. So Debbie Moran, from Obstacles to Quality Lighting Policy, the need for police education.
I hope that was for me. So I'd like to thank Dr. Xiao very much for inviting me. I've been down in the trenches since actually mid-2014 trying to fight all this white proliferation of white LED light in Houston very unsuccessfully. The good thing about fighting it unsuccessfully is I've probably done more research than any advocate. I'd like to thank lighting engineers Jim Benya in Davis, California, and Christian Monrad, who with the city of Tucson, for being by our side all of this time. And one of the best things that Chris Monrad advised me to do was to buy the current guidelines made by the Illuminating Engineering Society, RP 818, because he said it was highly supportive of our position now, although it took some time to get there and unfortunately came too late for Houston. And so the title of my talk is Obstacles to Quality Lighting Policy. And in my advocacy, I've come to the conclusion that the problem with fighting these lights is driven by a single factor. And that is that on the one hand, you have environmentalists, doctors, and advocates saying one thing about how to light, and you have the police saying something else. Either rightly or wrongly, people perceive that the police are saying something different. I now know for sure that they are, because I recently spoke at a Museum Park super neighborhood meeting. The policeman, after he gave a security report, said, he probably knew I was going to speak. He said, now I need to tell you we need bright light, the brighter the better, and the only downside is that you'll need blackout shades. So I asked him if he would stay for my talk. 20 minutes later, he was completely turned around. My lamp demonstration, which I will show you later, has turned around at least 5 police officers in 30 seconds. So let me go ahead here. I just want to briefly show you the difference between a dark sky city, Tucson on the left, and one that's not, Houston on the right. And now I'll show you what they look like on the ground, Tucson on the left, Houston on the right. And by the way, that's part of the reason we have the lower income problems with light exposure. Many apartment complexes are being lit the way they are on the right. And many of those people just have thin mini blinds and don't change them to thicker dark blackout shades, which we know will mitigate the health effects. This is my poster child for bad lighting in Houston. There is a writer from the New Yorker, David Owen, who postulated that cheap energy can backfire. So he said, there's no point in using a light that uses 6 times less energy if you use 6 times as much. Now, fortunately, since we took this picture about 4 months ago, this used car lot close to my house has started turning off 3/4 of its lights. Unfortunately, I just took the light, it's in my, took the picture, it's in my phone, but didn't make it to this talk. But you still see the cars. I believe that Houston uses about 5 times as much light as is necessary. And that was very easy to see during the Texas freeze, where you see the contrast between darkness and the extreme amount of light going up into the sky downtown. I was trying to figure out how to get this across to people. And I finally came up with one of my favorite movies. Let me see if I can find about the 30-second point and show you why I think that people know somewhere in the back of their minds that bright light is not better. This is my the movie Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock. Spoiler alert, if you have not seen the movie, this is a pivotal scene. And if you can't hear it, it's not important, but Jimmy Stewart is in a wheelchair and he's confronting a killer in his apartment. Let me see if I can get that started. Nope. I'm just going to start from the beginning since there we go. I'm not good with touch screens. There. Okay. Does anyone know how to start a video?
Oh, click it again. And then
Or maybe
give it
it's
a
on.
second to start.
Okay, thank you. If we can start 30 seconds in, that'd save a little time, but I've probably taken the whole 30 seconds. We did play this at the, there we go. Then we just need to start it. No. Here we go. May not be able to hear it, but see what he does to fend off the killer. So if you want to know what happens, you're going to have to see the whole movie. So I want to introduce you to the term veiling luminance. It is that haze. Actually, the exact reason those satellites are not looking at blue light is because it creates this haze. The light scatters so much. Same thing happens on the ground. The man at the gate is in both versions of this picture, but you cannot see him very well on the left because of the haze of the light. And this is an instantaneous effect. If you block the glare of the light source, you can immediately see a lot of details behind, which I can show with actual light using my lamp demonstration. This is now calculated for in the current guidelines that cities are supposed to use. Houston has not used that newer calculation method as far as I know. They've basically taken a machine and measured how much light hits the street, but they haven't measured how the eye perceives the light. And that's the problem. That's why we have so much light and so little visibility in Houston. So the problem, with bad lighting, bad LED lighting is that it's not just glare like the older lighting, it's glare on steroids. In this video, there are two, it looks like there's 2 white lights. There's actually only one. This is taken at an area school. And the second light is reflection. It's the idea of Jim King, a member of the Houston Astronomical Society. And the person filming is Steve Goldberg, who's helped me with a lot of my photographs on my website to show what good and bad lighting looks like. And his wife, watch her look go from right to left, or left to right, I should say, in the video. Let me see if this will play. Sometimes I cannot get it to play on an Apple. Can you get started for me, please? Back one slide. There we go. So this is why in the new guidelines from RP 818, they say you don't actually necessarily want perfect uniformity on the street. If you have to choose between glare and uniformity, you choose less uniformity and less glare. That way the pedestrian alternately has high contrast, either a dark silhouette against a bright background or positively lit, but does not disappear in glare. So the next thing I thought about was we have had a lot of fatal auto pedestrian accidents in Houston since all this light has gone up, and a few of them have been near my house. So this one was at Bel Air and Atwell, and I went to the site when it was on the news. It was 5 minutes away, still saw the police cars there, and I pointed to the light that's next to the Phillips 66 sign and said, that's a problem. So what had happened was a driver who was identified as mildly impaired ran off of the road and went parallel on the sidewalk and hit a man on a mobility scooter who was coming toward him on the side street from the Phillips 66. He went straight for that light. Now, that light is highly directional. So at certain points on the street, it hits you very hard and very directly. For a car driver, it's about 2 blocks back, but it has a slant range, that glare. For a truck driver who's sitting higher, it's about 1 block back. That's exactly where he ran onto the sidewalk. I also found out that drunk drivers have twice the problems with glare because their pupils dilate. So imagine going to eye doctor, he dilates your pupils and encountering a light like that. The drunk driver probably saw something that looked more like this at the point he ran off of onto the sidewalk. So our former police chief, Art Acevedo, did have the accident investigator call me. And like every police officer he's had me interact with, he knew nothing about glare, accused me of trying to excuse a drunk driver. I said, well, that may be. I don't really know the cause of the accident, but what I can tell you is there was a blinding light at the point of that accident. And we went round and round for 45 minutes. I finally had him go to my website, watch the disappearing pedestrian video, and he said, ah, now I get it. And this is, many police officers do not understand that. This is another side of the auto pedestrian accident, the same apartments I showed you earlier. I call this the Where's Waldo effect. There's 3 blocks of this kind of lighting on these apartment complexes. The car was coming from right to left. Off of the left side of the picture, north side of the apartments are 2 bus stops. It's amazing how much this lighting is near bus stops. And this was an auto pedestrian accident, which the pedestrian was in critical condition. And these lights were coming at the driver from the side. Therefore, it's not impossible to see the pedestrian. But because of the way you react to glare, that pedestrian is dimly lit, and the chances of noticing the pedestrian in all of that clutter are very slim. This is another one, again, near the other accident I showed you with a drunk driver, right across the street. I noticed that the people in the news said it appeared to be, every witness said it appears to be unintentional. A very large SUV hit a man and dragged him 130 feet and then drove off. And I wondered, is it possible for a large SUV to hit somebody and not realize it? And I did find stories where that happened. And so I went over there, and I don't know for sure, but I sent the picture to Art Acevedo. I said, I don't know if this is the cause of the accident, but this is the lighting on one end of your police tape. And he took it seriously. And I found it was incredibly bright if you're a driver. It's right at eye level. So this is what I call the accident possibly waiting to happen. This is some new pedestrian lighting planned by Public Works, and it's not incredibly bright. And you can definitely see if you're at the intersection, there's a lot of clutter because all four parts of the intersection have irregularly spaced lights like that. But look what happens when you're approaching those lights. This is what you see. And it was not until we went back to take the picture, I drove this route, that I even noticed that there were bus stops on either side of the street. Now, theoretically, those people should go to this incredibly busy lit intersection with people turning right and left and fast traffic coming two different ways. But there's shopping directly across the street. And I think the temptation to jaywalk is going to be extraordinarily high rather than going to the busy intersection. And what's worse is the cars have just come around the curve before they encounter this view. And by the way, the street is lit with our new LED street lights. This is just a quarter-mile north was similar design lights with warm shielded lighting. This is again back to Tucson. What I wanted to mention with this picture is that Tucson meets but does not exceed the lighting levels recommended by IES RP 818. Many cities like Las Vegas and Houston doubled the amount directly under the light because they thought that way you would see between the lights better, but our eye reacts such that those areas turn jet black. So the reason you don't want to exceed that is there's a diminishing return. This graph was from a webinar by the Illuminating Engineering Society. A speaker there said that what it shows is plotting light level versus accident rate. So on the left, on the far left, you have no light at all. As you add light, the accident rates drop precipitously, and then they completely level off. This is for 4 different sizes of streets. And in some cases, even get worse as you add glare. So there's zero benefit to using more energy than necessary. And in fact, some cities ramp up the lighting, like Houston has an expectation that the LEDs will wear out and get a little bit dimmer later in life if they don't have a dimmable system. And RP 818 in chapter 1 actually cautions against doing that because it will reduce visibility. Another thing that Chris Monrad told me was that it was no longer recommending the bluest white lights as being the lowest energy and therefore the most cost efficient and the best for climate change. And it didn't say that anywhere explicitly, but in chapter 2 about how the eye works, I found a paragraph that said, well, there are studies showing that under scotopic vision, that's what we amateur astronomers have. After 30 minutes of dark adapting, we don't see color, we only use our rods. With that left curve, our spectral sensitivity is highest in the bluer part of the spectrum. That's the light we see as brightest. But if we're under street lights, we still see color. We still use our cones in our eyes. We can tell what color that a car is red. The spectral sensitivity curve is different. It actually peaks in the warmer part of the spectrum. And if you look where the photopics curve is in the blue-green, it's way down the spectral sensitivity. So you have cities bombarding us with white light, glare that scatters in the atmosphere and in our eyes, and not even seeing it all that well. And that explains why Los Angeles, when they abandoned the lighting, went down dramatically, and they abandoned their white lighting, moved to warmer lighting, and they went down dramatically in their wattage, as you see the newer lights are as you rise up in that graph. I understand running low on time. We've already talked about this. What I did want to mention is that the Texas Medical Center has not gotten the memo. We're doing star parties on top of the new Blossom Hotel, and an advocate. I was giving a lighting talk. I didn't make the first one. I got this picture 10 minutes before my talk and put it in there. So doctors here don't seem to know about the issue. And then finally, this is light trespass. I want to mention one last accident. This explains why many blinds are not good enough for this kind of lighting in your windows. But this was also the site of a very high profile, nationally reported auto pedestrian accident. And I remembered the street because this had been sent to us several months before by Jennifer Sotillo, who I hope is listening today. And she had told me that that light in the background made it impossible to see the driveway to their apartment, to their townhomes. The night of the accident, she had sent me the picture back here on the right, and it looks like you can see. So I wrote her, I said, I know you've sent me the picture on the right, but you told me you can't see the driveway. What is the actual visibility? Often when people are trying to show how annoying the glare is, you get an unrealistic view of what the street actually looks like. So it's actually more like this. She told me, you cannot see the driveway. I was out there all night with the police and the journalists, 3 dead bodies, and showing them the light. The happy ending is I understand that she just a couple of days ago wrote to me that she's gotten a lot of these lights turned off with the help of the city. And this is, I just want to, maybe I could just end with this slide. This is a Denny's, the one place in a city of 4 million I've seen that actually has sane intensity, warm LED parking lot lighting that would solve the problem. And the view on the right, we couldn't get the camera to show it, but you can get anywhere around these LEDs. You can get directly under them and look directly at them. And that's what they look like to your eyes. Very low glare, great visibility. I happen to notice this beautiful golden glow going to another auto pedestrian accident site to check out the lighting. And I'm going to end here because of time. If there's a little bit of time, I have my lamp demonstration because I think showing people with real light is the best. They accuse you of doctoring photos. And this is what has actually convinced everybody. So let me get it on before you turn off the lights. I use, you just need this lamp, which has 5 colors, 7 brightness levels, a gooseneck, so you can do any degree of glare at any color. And I'm going to do it first for the people over here. You can see it best. And what I tell people focus on is both figures. You will always see the one under the light. So let me go ahead and start with the bad security glare version here. So if you can have the lights turned off. Okay, so the people on my over here who have the line of sight, or maybe everyone can try it, try holding up your hand and notice that the guy in the back, even though he's not well lit, will suddenly come into view. Okay, so
can you also like put your hand over it for the online video?
yeah, let me see if that'll show.
Yeah.
Does it show up for
Yeah,
online?
yeah.
It's fantastic. So it's just like that slide I showed you. Next thing you can do is you can turn it downward, and yes, everything's very sharp, but who can sleep with that? So let's try going to the warmest color, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, there's 5 colors. And now you see them great, but how much light do you actually need? So I'm going to gradually, I tell kids to make it so faint that you can't see anybody. This is the faintest, and you can still see both. If I go a little bit brighter, you might have like the street lighting on a major street. You can go a little bit brighter, you can go a little bit brighter. But at most, I'm using half of the initial brightness. At this brightness, you see both better than the first indication. And this is how much light I'm using. So this is the message that's extraordinarily hard to get through to people, is how little light you need for your eyes to react well to it. When you cut out the glare, you need very little light to see well. And unfortunately, progressive politicians, I found it wasn't just Houston, it also happened in Lincoln, Nebraska. Their head of Office of Sustainability called me. He said, we were also told that the blue or white lights would require the least energy. When I sent them the Los Angeles street lights, he said, we're going to look at this again, and they made a change. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the panelists to, who are those who are in the room, to come up, or if you could- if you
Sure,
don't mind
I'll
saying
go
that.
get my mask. We'll be a little bit more. Oh, there's only 2 of us, right?
Three.
Oh, there's 3 of us in the room.
And then we have about 10 minutes for question and answer. So, well, I guess we'll-
There was a-
we'll go with the one cascade in the room, and then the one online while you're.
With the black marble product, is the flare, are gas flares removed from black marble product?
I don't believe so.
Can you repeat the
And-
question for the online audience?
Because I could see when you showed the map of the USA showing the change in lighting from the black marble, the areas that have all the flares were the largest blocks of red. And so I'm pretty sure they're in there. It would be, we know where the flares are. We have we put out an annual summary that lists all their lat longs and how much we estimate they're flaring. One could put the 2 together and at least acknowledge that those are flares, not lights from cities or towns.
And the question was, does the NASA's black marble product already adjust for mask out or filter the gas flares? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Normally I'll say that first. Okay. Feel free. And then we'll go to John next. Sure. How much can be solved by simple designs and light directing that is covers that keep lighting detected downwards versus escape light?
And we're gonna, this is directed to John Barentine, but I think several of you could answer this. So I'm gonna.
Can you all hear me? Can you thumbs up? Good. Okay. Yes, that's a great question, Jonathan. I can tell you that we could solve about 50% of the problem or so if we shielded all of the lights in the world that are currently unshielded. That direct emission of light upward is what has the most significant effect, particularly on sky glow. That's what we're talking about at distance, because that light is going up, so it's not so much of an influence on the ground. But even if we shielded all of the world's lights, we would still have a problem with sky glow because there's plenty of light that's reflecting off the ground. And we can only do so much to change the optical properties of surfaces, maybe darken them in some cases. Some cities are going the other direction out here in the West in order to combat the urban heat island effect. Some cities like Los Angeles are starting to paint their streets white. And we don't know yet what that's going to do to sky glow, but naively, we would think that it would increase. So I think inevitably we're going to have to talk about the issue of lighting levels, like Debbie was just showing, bringing those lighting levels down to something that's probably safer to begin with will have the effect of reducing reflected light. And we should see that as some amount of reduction of sky glow. So yes, great question.
About gas flares, that's why the brightest lights that can be observed by beers, they're all gas flares, and it's because there's no shielding, and so they're entirely exposed to the sky.
John.
Oh, thank you for this wonderful session. This was really amazing. I've learned a lot here. But my question actually was kind of building on that last one, which because we have projects going on working with cities about cooling the cities through painting the roofs white and the streets white. And so, you know, I'm thinking about the tension there between the night lights and the reflected glow for cooling for urban heat islands. But I was also thinking about the tension, and maybe, I hope I understood this correctly, from Chris's talk and some of the other things that came up about comparing the different types of lights. So LED, we have a lot of blue, which is not good, but LED also has the least flicker, which is good. And so you go to these warmer ones, you're going to have more flicker, which is bothersome, but less blue. So kind of wondering where's the optimum?
Well, I think the optimum would be to modify the excitation wavelength for the LEDs so it was more in the green instead of the blue.
Is
And
that more expensive? Or is
it's just my understanding in talking to lighting engineers, it's the industry did it that way because they wanted to have white lights, and they thought that adds more sparkle. What I understand is that, yeah, there would be some cost associated with modifying the LEDs so their excitation wavelength was not in blue and move it over to a slightly longer wavelength, but it's possible.
I'd like to mention that one of the types of calculation methods for lighting is called luminance, and it's how much light bounces off the surface. It takes the albedo or brightness of the surface into account. So theoretically, it may not be the best thing for the sky, but it should bring light levels down even further because you wouldn't need as much light to if it's bouncing off of a bright surface. It would be really great for climate change. And it would certainly lower the light levels if people actually calculate it for that.
Tracy.
So first, I just like to say thank you all so much. This was so interesting. And so I guess my question is a little bit, I guess I'm surprised how I really hadn't heard this much before. And I've done work with like the planetarium in Chicago, and then they're very interested in clear light pollution issues so that you can see, like, let's see other planets. But I guess I'd always sort of internalized a narrative that, like, it's nice to see the Milky Way, but you don't want to have crime on the streets. I mean, almost as if it's this trade-off. And I think that this conversation has really shown that that is not the trade-off at all. And I guess I'm just curious, like, why isn't this message getting out there more? Because it seems like a very clear, like there's a solution, there's a multifaceted problem, there's a clear solution, and the Denny's looked so pretty. I mean, that was a beautiful Denny's.
Okay, one thing I found is that for a long time, the Illuminating Engineering Society was actually fighting us. They discredited the American Medical Association report that came out. I personally believe, maybe I'm getting paranoid after working on this for 6 years, but also seeing things like utilities, a city in Michigan expected to have a 50% savings when they switched to LED light. The very next year, the utility came and asked to double the tariff per watt. So I think LED lighting is disruptive to people who sell lighting. It should be changed a lot less frequently, and people who sell energy, at its worst, you're reducing energy use 50%. And I found those are the people who fight you, and they go to the city councils and they think these are the experts on lighting. They're the ones who sell light, and these environmentalists don't know anything. So, and then you have the police saying you need riders. So they have the police backing them up. It's a very emotional issue. I mean, everybody who's tried to approach a neighbor, you have to do it very carefully, but some people get a very hostile reaction to your white lights coming into my window. You can certainly show them that their house could be seen a lot better, but you have to get through that initial hostility. I tried to approach a lot of civic clubs, which is what worked in Phoenix. Almost none of them would even allow me to speak about it. We know what we're doing, but we're really happy with these new lights. It's a very emotional issue as long as people think that bright white light is protecting them. By that measure, Houston should be the safest city in the world. Instead, we are at record levels of auto pedestrian accidents, and the crimes of rage are every single day. There was one again yesterday with the white lights blazing away in the background. People are killing each other over parking places, petty arguments. That's gone up. I think there's some studies which could connect this less reduced quality of sleep to that kind of behavior. And we have to get that message out to the police.
Has anybody, I'm sorry, I can jump in this. Has anybody done a study on Tucson after they went to their dark sky or Flagstaff about any crime?
I did look to see, I think Tucson's also having crime problems too. So some of it's related to the pandemic. But what we can certainly say is that these lights that the city councils thought would save the city from all these problems are definitely not doing that, especially in Houston.
I'm gonna have John speak.
Can I just comment on that point very briefly? Because living in Tucson, I have looked into this, and I'm originally from Phoenix, and so very familiar there as well. The main difference between our cities is that City of Phoenix puts at least one street light on every residential city block, whether it's considered necessary or not. Here in Tucson, we don't do that. Lighting is only added on a basis on which it's shown to be necessary. And I've looked at overnight crime statistics in the two cities, controlling for the difference in population. So if you look at incidents of overnight crime rate adjusted per capita, our rate of crime is no different than Phoenix. So whatever's controlling that, it can't be the lighting. If Phoenix were an intrinsically safer city because of the lighting, they would have either more traffic accidents during the overnight hours, more overnight crimes of opportunity, and it seems like the data just do not bear that out.
It's a great topic. I know we're at time, but maybe just to okay, so is Cascade is the ask one? It's okay if I ask it. It's awesome. But then that'll be our final question. But I really appreciate it. The speakers are here on our virtually, so I would definitely encourage you to talk to them. Awesome. Final question.
It's sort of a comment, really, but going back to the first half of time about this being an environmental justice, social justice issue, and your findings about differences between rural and urban social development. I thought that results, where you were looking at stratified results for the effect of light on health outcomes by rural, urban, and by your social, the social vulnerability index that you're using. So very interesting. And we found similar results for traffic, where we find that the most disadvantaged communities have a higher level of risk due to traffic. The same as finding high level of risk due to light. So if you're looking at crime and light, do we need to think about it in an environmental justice, a social justice lens, where we put the lighting where it's needed, rather than, looking at the city as a whole, every block is, every block in the city needs that light. And then going back to rural areas and see whether, there are other factors that need to be analyzed to see what drives the health aspect of it, right?
And if you could repeat the question, just, sorry.
Well, I
Okay.
think
Before answering.
because it's a comment and I think I'm going to repeat a lot of the things there. I just want to say that I think I agree with you 100%. I think we sometimes have the assumption that if it's the case in one area, that's also the case in another area, in one population can be translated to another, but it's usually not the case. So it's really a complex and nonlinear relationship out there. So I think as public health researcher myself, I think it's really important to understand the population variation. And really, try to have those tailored interventions for each community. And I think that's really important.
We have time for one comment. So the Kinder Institute at Rice University did a survey of lighting. There's actually more lights per mile in the lower income neighborhoods of Houston than in the higher income neighborhoods. And the other thing is there was a one study that finally compared blue light versus warmly lit neighborhoods in Barcelona and Madrid in 2018. They found a lot more breast, prostate, and colorectal cancers in the blue lit neighborhoods, but they did say the thick blackout shades mitigated that. So my theory is that some of these I don't see the thick blackout shades on the lower income apartments. I do see them on the very fancy houses with the same white lights in their neighborhood.
That's going back to your point about uneven exposure and uneven response.
Yeah.
Right? So they don't have the resources to mitigate.
Exactly.
All right, let's have a big round of applause